If there's one lesson I hope you take from my story, it's this. Be the change you wish to see in the world. And remember, when it comes to your children, don't let fear hold them back. Just because one apple is rotten doesn't mean the whole tree is spoiled. Let them experience the joy of places like Chuck E. Cheese and trust in the good that still exists in the world.
Hallucination. Hallucination. Things that go bump in the night.
Here's my story that I hadn't fully told everyone that I'm telling now about my time working the night shift at Chuck E. Cheese's after the shooting. I used to work the night shift at Chuck E. Cheese's every day in December. The pay was decent, $10 an hour, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to tell you my story, the story of what happened after December 14th, 1993. That day was like any other, or so I thought. It was December 14th, 1993, when everything changed. Something terrible happened that night. Something I'll never forget. There was a shooting that left 3 kids and 1 adult injured. The kids were all so young, 17, 19, and then there was Margaret, who was 50. Not a kid, but still someone who didn't deserve what happened. I had to speak with the law enforcement that night, recounting every detail of the scene, giving them my point of view, but after everything that happened that night, I was ready to quit. You see, I knew the man who did it, Nathan Dunlap. We used to work together. He was just 19, but he was like the rest of us, trying to make ends meet, clocking in and clocking out. He seemed normal, quiet even. We didn't talk much. But when we did, there was nothing that stood out. He didn't seem like the type who would do something like this. That's what haunts me the most. How wrong I was. Nathan had been fired earlier that year, and I remember him being upset about it, but nothing more. I thought he'd moved on, found something else. But on that night, he came back. The restaurant was about to close, and there was a strange tension in the air, but I didn't pay it much mind. He walked in, just before closing, with a look in his eyes I'd never seen before. I didn't realize what it was until it was too late. He waited until the restaurant was empty, just as employees left, cleaning up like usual. That's when he pulled out a gun. My mind froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He started shooting Sylvia, Ben, Colleen, Margaret. They didn't stand a chance. He was methodical, cold. I'll never forget the sound, the chaos. I'll never forget the look on his face. I thought I knew him. I was wrong. Bobby was the only one who survived, but just barely. He played dead, and when Nathan wasn't looking, he managed to escape and call for help. But by then, it was too late for the others. Nathan stole money from the safe and left. He fled like nothing had happened. But something had happened, something that left a stain on the place, on all of us. When the police caught him, he was almost calm, like he'd done what he had come to do, and it was over. He said it was revenge, that he was angry about being fired. But the explanation never made sense to me. It was more than that. Something darker. Something I'll never fully, truly understand. I still see his face sometimes, hear his voice. I thought I knew him, but I was wrong. And that's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life. But that wasn't the strangest part of the story. No, that was just the beginning. I'm here to tell you what happened the night I worked the late shift at Chuck E. Cheese on December 15th, 1993. I was going to quit. After everything that had happened, I was ready to walk away, but they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. $30 an hour. They were desperate, and I needed the money, so I agreed to work one last time. What happened that night shook me to my very core. Driving down the road to Chuck E. Cheese's, I couldn't shake the haunting replay of the shooting from my mind. It was as if the images of that night were burned into my memory, looping endlessly. I was afraid. My nerves frayed, but the offer of $30 an hour was too tempting to ignore. As I pulled into the parking lot, the once familiar neon sign now felt cold and distant, its flickering lights casting a pale, ghostly glow over the empty space. The darkness seemed to swallow the building whole, leaving it eerily silent, except for those occasional rustles of leaves in the breeze. The sense of abandonment was almost palpable. I parked in my usual spot, the engine's hum fading into the stillness of the night. The quiet was unsettling, and I felt a chill despite the relatively mild weather. Stepping out of my car, I closed the door with a soft thud that felt unnaturally loud in the quiet. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking slightly as I walked towards the entrance. The restaurant's exterior lights were off, casting long, sinister shadows that seemed to stretch and move with each step I took. The usual comforting glow of the Chuck E. Cheese's sign was replaced by a foreboding darkness. I approached the door, the metal handle cold under my grip. As I unlocked it, the faint creak of the hinges echoed ominously through the empty lot. The interior was a stark contrast to the bright, bustling place it had once been. The lights inside were off, and the vast space seemed dark and oppressive. I flicked on the lights, but they flickered uncertainly before settling into a dim, inadequate glow. The once cheerful decorations now seemed grim and out of place, their colors muted and shadows deepened by a feeble illumination. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet hum of the ancient air conditioning system, the occasional drip of water from a leaky pipe, and the soft scurrying of unseen creatures in the walls. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the eerie atmosphere made it clear this night would be anything but ordinary. Putting the keys into the lock, I turned it with a heavy feeling in my gut. As I pushed the door open, a chill ran down my spine. The building was shrouded in darkness, the dim light from the street lamps outside barely penetrating the interior. The once vibrant animatronics were now mere silhouettes in the gloom. Their outlines loomed large and distorted, their vacant eyes glinting ominously in the faint light. They'd always creep me out, their jerky, mechanical movements, and the unnerving way they seemed to watch you, even when they were perfectly still. As I stepped inside, my footsteps echoed loudly in the empty space, amplifying the silence that surrounded me. The familiar, almost comforting noises of the restaurant were replaced by an unsettling quiet. The animatronics' stationary forms seemed to cast long, twisted shadows across the floor, adding to the already eerie atmosphere. The sense of their watchful presence made the darkness feel even more oppressive. I walked briskly down the hallway towards the security office, eager to escape the oppressive darkness. The hall was dimly lit, and every step I took seemed to amplify the eerie silence around me. The security office was a small, windowless room, tucked away from the main dining area. It was cluttered with old monitors and outdated equipment, giving it a somewhat disheveled and neglected appearance. The walls were adorned with a mix of peeling wallpaper and hastily taped up notices, some which were reminders of the past incidents and outdated safety protocols. A large metal desk dominated the room, its surface strewn with various papers, a few old coffee mugs, and a clutter of dusty tables. An old swivel chair, its fake leather cracked and worn, sat in front of the desk, facing the row of monitors that displayed the feeds from the restaurant security cameras. The screens flickered intermittently, casting an eerie, shuddering glow across the room. The dim light from the monitors was the only source of illumination, creating long, shifting shadows that danced around the walls. The air was cool and stale, with a faint, musty smell that lingered from years of accumulated dust. A small fan blew quietly in the corner, doing little to dispel the sense of unease that filled the room. I took a deep breath and settled into the chair, trying to focus on the task at hand while the darkness outside seemed to close in around me. I looked at the monitor in front of me, its screen dark and lifeless. I reached over and flicked the switch, and the monitor came to life with a soft hum. The security cameras began to feed live footage onto the screen, each camera view slowly flickering to clarity. The monitor showed static at first, then gradually resolved into the familiar, unsettling images of the restaurant's various angles. The main dining area appeared empty and forlorn, with tables and chairs scattered in disarray. The arcade games stood still, their once vibrant colors now muted in the dim light. In the top corner of the screen, a live feed of the entrance showed the door I had just come through, its shadowy frame contrasting sharply with the rest of the room. As I scanned through the different camera angles, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The restaurant, usually so full of life and noise, now felt hauntingly empty. Sitting in the chair, I tried to relax and let the hours slip by, but time seemed to stretch endlessly. The clock on the wall flashed 12:45, and I turned my attention to the monitors, trying to keep myself occupied. I focused on the stage, where the animatronics were supposed to be. The animatronics were positioned in their usual spots, motionless in the dim light. But then something caught my eye. The head of the mouse animatronic, Chuck E. Cheese himself, seemed to shift. It was subtle at first, just a slight movement that made me question my eyes. The camera angle was distorted by the low light, but it looked as if the head was turning directly towards the lens. My heart dropped into my stomach as I stared at the screen. The eyes of the animatronic, usually vacant and mechanical, seemed to be locked onto the camera with an unsettling intensity. It was as if it was staring right at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling it was aware of my presence. I blinked, hoping to clear my vision, but when I looked again, the animatronic's head was still turned towards the camera. The eerie gaze seemed to follow me, and I couldn't tell if I was imagining something, or if something was truly strange and was happening. The silence of the restaurant felt even heavier now, amplifying the dread that had settled in my chest. Feeling the mounting anxiety, I decided to avoid the cameras, hoping that focusing on something else might calm me down. I grabbed a pencil and paper and began drawing to pass the time. Though I was trying to distract myself with drawing, the delicate strokes of the pencil were a small comfort against the oppressive darkness of the restaurant. As the hours dragged on, I lost myself in the creative world, but the unease never fully left me. I glanced up occasionally, reassured by the steady movement of my pencil dancing across the paper, and the faint comforting sensation of whatever I was drawing. Eventually, I checked the time again. It was 2:35 a.m. The realization that several hours had passed made me feel both relieved and more unsettled. The restaurant was even quieter than before, and the silence seemed to weigh heavily on me. I debated checking the cameras again, but a wave of fear washed over me. The thought of facing whatever might be on those screens was daunting, and I wasn't sure I could handle seeing something unsettling again. The fear of what I might see, or what I might not see, kept me rooted to my seat. The pencil in my hand offering a temporary escape from the eerie reality of my surroundings. I knew I had to check the cameras. It was a part of my job, no matter how much I dreaded it. I forced myself to look at the monitors. As the feeds flickered to life, a cold shiver ran down my spine. All 4 animatronics were on the stage, their heads turned towards the camera. The familiar robotic figures were now staring directly into the lens, with unnerving lifelike expressions. Their eyes, usually vacant and unseeing, seemed to be following me, and their mechanical features took on a disturbing sense of intent. I whispered a stunned, "What the fuck?" under my breath. The sight was so surreal that it felt like a cruel joke, but the reality of the situation was all too clear. The hairs on my arms and neck stood on end as the eerie stillness of the scene filled me with a deep, unsettling dread. The animatronics just sat there, their eyes fixed on me, unblinking and unmoving. The eerie stillness of their gaze was suffocating, and the longer I stared, the more unnerved I became. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape the oppressive, nightmarish atmosphere of the restaurant and never look back. The thought that these mechanical figures were somehow moving or observing me unnaturally was terrifying. My mind raced with dark possibilities. Could they really be moving on their own? The notion that I might be witnessing something beyond the realm of ordinary fear made my skin crawl. The sinking feeling settled in my chest. Was this my punishment for failing to protect the others? The idea that their deaths, occurring under my watch, might be coming back to haunt me was almost too much to bear. As a security guard, I was supposed to keep everyone safe, but here I was, overwhelmed by the very things I was meant to oversee. The guilt and fear combined, making the thought of staying even more unbearable. I glanced back at the cameras, relieved to see the animatronics had returned to their usual positions, no longer staring directly at the camera. The momentary sense of relief was fleeting, though, as something nagged at the back of my mind. I quickly realized that I was wrong. There should have been 5 animatronics on stage, but now there were only 4 visible. The absence of the mouse animatronic, Chuck E. Cheese himself, was unsettling. Where was he? The sight of only 4 figures instead of the usual 5 filled me with a fresh wave of anxiety. The missing animatronic seemed to amplify the eeriness of the situation, and the silence in the restaurant felt even more oppressive. I had to figure out where Chucky was, and why he was no longer on stage, but the fear of what I might find made the thought of investigating even more daunting. I stayed perfectly still, straining to listen for any sound that might indicate someone or something approaching. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the distant hum of the restaurant's aging equipment. Then I heard it, faint, almost imperceptible. Footsteps, growing closer and closer to my office. Each step seemed to echo louder in my ears, making my heart race uncontrollably. The sound was steady, deliberate, and it sent a jolt of terror through me. I was on high alert, every muscle tensed, ready to bolt at the slightest sign of danger. The money I was making felt insignificant compared to the fear and dread I was experiencing. No amount of cash was worth facing whatever was creeping up to my office. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already in too deep. The voice that echoed through the office was unmistakable. "Welcome to Chuck E. Cheese's, where a kid can be a kid." It sounded eerily like Chuck E. Cheese himself. My heart pounded violently in my chest as I remained frozen in my seat, the sound of the voice chilling me to my core. The footsteps drew nearer, and then I heard a knocking at the door. The rhythmic, insistent thuds seemed to shake the very walls of the office. I had no intention of answering. The fear was overwhelming. The knocking grew louder, more urgent. I felt trapped in a nightmare where I couldn't escape. My mind raced as I looked around the office for a place to hide. The room was small and cluttered, with no real cover to speak of. Fortunately, there were 2 doors in the room. If I was cornered, I'd have a chance to flee through the other exit. My hands shook as I planned my escape, knowing that if I needed to, I could use the second door to make a run for it. The creeping dread remained, but the thought of a possible escape route gave me a sliver of hope amidst the terror. After what felt like an eternity of taunting, the door was suddenly and violently smashed open with a single forceful push. Standing there was a towering, nightmarish figure. Without a second thought, I bolted from my chair and sprinted towards the exit. The pounding of heavy footsteps echoed behind me, growing louder and more menacing as I ran. Glancing towards the stage, I saw the remaining 4 animatronics staring at me, and one of them was now moving to join in the chase. I burst through the front door of the building, ignoring the terrifying sight behind me. My car was just a few yards away, and I ran straight for it, fumbling with my keys as I struggled to unlock the door. I threw myself into the driver's seat, heart pounding and hands shaking, and quickly started the engine. The car roared to life, and I peeled out of the parking lot. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead. As I sped away, the sense of impending danger slowly faded, though the adrenaline still coursed through me. I didn't dare look back, focusing solely on getting as far away from that nightmare as possible. The relief of escaping, even only temporary, washed over me, though the memory of that harrowing night would undoubtedly haunt me for a long time. Later that day, the decision was made to demolish the building. The restaurant that had once been a place of joy and laughter was now reduced to rubble. The news of the demolition was almost a relief. The place had become a haunting reminder of the terror I had experienced. I never returned to Chuck E. Cheese's again. The memories of that night and the sight of the animatronics would linger in my mind, and the thought of working there again was unbearable. The restaurant, now just a heap of debris, was a stark symbol of the nightmare that had unfolded, and it was clear that that chapter of my life was permanently closed. At 65 years old, I look back on my life with a sense of fulfillment. I dedicated my career to serving as a police officer, and after many years, I've retired with pride, knowing I made a lasting contribution to my community. If there's one lesson I hope you take from my story, it's this: be the change you wish to see in the world, and remember, when it comes to your children, don't let fear hold them back. Just because one apple is rotten doesn't mean the whole tree is spoiled. Let them experience the joy of places like Chuck E. Cheese, and trust in the good that still exists in the world.